pinstripe suit. So you can picture what this guy looks like. And our plane had to change gates. Kind of a hassle, kind of a pain, but it happens. And
So today I'm listening to Morgan Housel's Rules of the Money Game, which is a pretty interesting topic so far. So he's just talking about the game of money. So enjoy, and then I'll probably stop to give comments every once in a while because I think this is a pretty interesting topic.
he lost his mind. He was so angry. He was dropping F-bombs at the gate agent. And I remember sitting there watching and thinking, how could you have possibly made it this far in life without the ability to put up with and handle petty annoyances? And I think the answer to that question, I think there is an answer to that question. The answer is he probably lives in a life of denial, thinking that he can control things that he actually can't. And the people who are around him in his job are probably not bringing and exposing him to a lot of the problems in the company because they know that's how he's going to react. Just the idea that there is a certain level of hassle and nonsense that you have to accept is so important. It's not very intuitive because, look, if you own a grocery store, shoplifting is a big problem. It is at every grocery store. But now you could bring shoplifting down to zero. You could guarantee it's zero if you strip search every person who shopped at your store. But then, of course, nobody would shop at that store anymore. So therefore, the optimal level of shoplifting is not zero. There is an optimal level that you just accept and put up with and work into your budget as just a fact of life. Having no tolerance for hassle or nonsense or inefficiency is not an admirable trait. It's just denying reality. And once you accept a certain level of bullshit in the world.
So yesterday was interesting. I drove someone who from East Brunswick, New Jersey, all the way to Westbury, which is in Long Island. So that was like definitely, that was the longest drive I've done so far. But she was really cool. She was driving to visit her boyfriend, and it was cute. She was definitely like a hopeless romantic. So we connected on that, and I was just sharing with her about how I met my wife, and we met at this place called Stuff Your Face, which is in New Brunswick by Rutgers, and it was cute. We had like a really good conversation. So you never know who you're gonna meet. That's the interesting part about life. And so I'm heading to this place called Stretch Zone right now, and I'm excited because when you're driving all the time, I feel like it's definitely good to stretch every once in a while. So today my schedule is pretty awesome. I'm excited. I'm interviewing Marcus Chan, who's a millionaire. He's like one of those like LinkedIn top voices. So I'm excited to I had him on the podcast, interviewed him on the podcast a couple times in a row. So super excited about that. And then I'm going to reach out to more partners at law firms and accounting firms. Probably more focus on accounting firms since we had like a really good meeting the other day, and continue on that path. So I'm excited for all of that. I have a coaching client call today as well, and what else? So overall it's gonna be pretty productive day, and hopefully get to spend some time playing Diablo with my beautiful wife. I know that we haven't played video games together in a while, so that'll be fun. And I think she's gonna try to cut my hair as well. It's definitely about time to get a haircut, so it's gonna be fun.
You stop denying its existence. You have a clearer view of how the real
So I'm
world
heading to Princeton
actually
right now.
works. Okay, number 5. This one is related to number 4. And by the way, these are
my
as
God.
rare as I get.
There's always traffic on Route 1 too.
Few things are as valuable in the modern world as a good bullshit detector. That, I think, no matter what your field is, what your career is, what you're doing in life, there is so much of what happens in the world is sales and people putting on a face and people performing for one another and trying to get your attention. That if you do not have a good bullshit detector, you are going to have a very difficult time in life.
That's a good advice.
A lot of this
good advice.
by the way, comes from good, well-meaning, well-intentioned.
Having a good BS detector, I think, would have saved me a lot of money earlier on in my entrepreneurial journey.
If you said, how many people are truly evil in the world? I would say, I don't know, 1%, 5%. I'm making that up, but that seems about right.
He calls it a bullshit detector. I do think being able to discern, which means discernment is like a new term that I just learned recently, but basically it means like the ability to have good judgment is a pretty valuable skill. Something I'm still working on, but I think you learn more from your mistakes than you do from when things are going gravy. So good advice, Morgan Housel.
What if I
Appreciate
said,
that.
what percentage of people are willing to do something evil because they have bad incentives? I would say, I 50%,
Bad incentives.
75%.
Interesting.
And so once you accept that, you realize how important it is to have your BS alarm detector go off.
So he brings up a good point. Having good incentives. So there's certain companies in sales organizations where the incentives like just doesn't make any sense. So he's talking about being able to create good incentives so that, because in sales, for instance, it's like all that matters is getting the deal, right? But when we think about the long-term incentives, which means like actually doing what's best for your clients, it's better to do the right thing, and long-term that'll pay off versus like the short-term, which is like pressuring clients. So this is an interesting concept. Let's hear more.
Particularly in things like financial services, when there are so many good, well-intentioned people out there who can make an ungodly amount of money if they sell you the right product or tell you what you want to hear. If you don't have a good antenna for those kind of things, it's going to be very difficult to get ahead financially in this world. Okay, number 6. A lot of financial debates are just people with different time horizons talking over each other.
Wow.
So many investors play different games. Everything from day trading penny stocks to endowments that are investing for the next century and everything in between. And we should never pretend that everyone in that spectrum is playing the same game by the same rules, with the same goals, with the same risk tolerances. They are so obviously not. The stock market, I think, is rational, but investors play different games, and those games look irrational to people who are playing a different game. That, I think, once you understand it, you really start only paying attention to the news and the information and the people who are playing a similar game to you. But so often that's not the case. I think that most of the time when people debate about finance, of should you buy this stock, how much money...
Oh, so just for context, so this guy named Morgan Housel, he wrote the book Psychology of Money, which is like one of the top selling books for this year about money. And my takeaways from listening to the episode yesterday was pretty profound. Basically, he said, look, like he's like, and he gave this story about how we are very status driven. So he said that at the end of the day, so the analogy he made is like, if you get the highest class of a Toyota versus the low, so he used the Four Seasons as an example. He's like, the basic room in the Four Seasons compared to the highest suite at the Hyatt will probably cost around the same, but he's like, it's always better to do the highest suite because it's not as, prestigious sounding as the Four Seasons, but you'll get all the widgets and all the upgrades and all the fancy things, and it's the same price. Versus if you get the lowest room in the Four Seasons, you can tell people you stayed at the Four Seasons. So he also made the same analogy, like the highest Toyota with all the upgrades are going to be so much better than the BMW at the lowest tier BMW, because he said you can tell people you have a Beamer, but that car is not going to be as good as the highest upgrade with like all the bells and whistles and all that. So he was just saying, be careful about our status and our ability to, it's like us trying to prove to other people that we've made it. So I thought that was an interesting concept.
Should you save? How should you spend your money? They're not actually debating. They're not actually disagreeing with one another. It's people with a different time horizon or a different risk tolerance or just a different
Is there like accident or something?
Each other.
Jeez.
Everybody in investing in finance is making a bet on an unknown future.
Yeah.
It's only called speculation when you disagree with somebody else's bet. when you are playing a different game than they are, but you don't even realize it. I heard this great story years ago. It was this dad played a game every week with his son. His son was a child. And the dad said, here's a dime and here's a nickel. Pick one. You can keep one of these. And the son took the nickel every single time. And his older brother said, you're crazy. A dime is worth more than a nickel. Why do you keep taking the nickel if he's offering you a dime? And the son said, because if I pick the dime, Dad would stop playing this game with me. And I thought that was such a great little story because it just highlights that some people who do things that look inefficient or look like they are not doing the right thing, look like they are leaving money on the table, are actually just playing a different game than you are. Okay, number 7. You cannot believe in risk without also believing in luck because they are fundamentally the same thing, just in the opposite direction. Both of them, luck and risk, are just an acknowledgement that things outside of your control can have a bigger impact on outcomes than anything you do on your own. So many people in investing spend all of their day, they are so aware of the concept of risk. Everything they do all day is risk, 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 risk. Risk management, you have risk-adjusted returns, you hire risk managers. There is almost a complete ignorance, though, of luck. Nobody talks about luck-adjusted returns. Nobody hires a luck manager. But they are fundamentally the same thing. And risk and luck, I think, impact the world, particularly financial markets, in the same way. Part of the reason I think this is because if I were to say, you got lucky, the success that you have, you just got lucky, I look like a jerk. I look like I am jealous. I look like I'm a little bitter. So
there's luck
and
to everything.
People tend not to do that.
That's
and if
point.
I were to look in the mirror and say that my success just came from luck, that's pretty painful to accept for myself. And so it is so easy to ignore luck when we are so cognizant of risk, even when they are fundamentally the same thing. They're important to keep in mind here. Risk's greatest fuel in life are leverage, overconfidence, ego, and impatience. That's what tends to drive risk. The greatest antidote to risk, like getting rid of it, is having options, humility, and other people's trust. Number 8.
That's a good point. There's always such a huge element of risk associated or luck associated with everything, right? Like being able to, we call it the genetic lottery, right? If you were born to parents that, like, let's say you're born in America and you grew up with like pretty wealthy parents, like obviously you're gonna be more set up than someone who has grown up poor. But I do think 50% of it is still what you make of it, right? Like there's plenty of stories of, I mean, you're not going to be, it's less likely you'll be like the next Steve Jobs, but at least it is somewhat possible, at least in America, where I hear in other countries, for instance, where you're born does matter a little bit more in terms of like, there's like different systems and caste systems and whatnot. So I know yesterday we were talking about how in India, sometimes if you are born in like a poorer caste system, it's a little bit harder to move out of that. But I would argue it's still pretty hard in the U.S. unless you just are super talented or you just outwork everyone else.
Save like a pessimist and invest like an optimist. Getting rich and staying rich are two completely different skills. They're often contradictory skills.
Yeah, I guess there was an
in
accident.
equal parts to do well over time. It is so important to know the difference between rosy optimism and periods of chaos that tend to trend upward.
Weird.
And the idea, if you are an optimist, like that's great, like people should be an optimist, but optimism does not mean that you think everything is going to be great. That is just complacency. What I think real optimism is realistic optimism, is this idea that things will work out in the long run, but the period between now and then is going to be a constant chain of chaos and misery and setback and recession and pandemic.
Yay, we made it.
Survive and endure financially when you want your optimism to actually pay off. So that barbell personality is so incredibly important, but it's rare because those skills contradict each other. Most people I've found are either optimists or pessimists. They're either full-blown die-hard optimists who get washed out when...
So that's a good concept too. I would say I'm definitely overly optimistic, which is sometimes really good, but sometimes it's hard for me to be with the reality of things. So, this guy's pretty smart, man. I'll definitely
Economic
keep listening to his
cycle turns.
podcast
Everyone
a lot
knows
more.
those people, everyone has seen those people, or they are full-blown pessimists. And they never believe in long-term optimism, and they never take advantage of the progress and productivity.
Ooh, yeah.
that happens
Let's see if
over
I still
time.
have any
One thing
pepperoni.
important
I
is
can't
that
believe
there
I
is more
crushed
to
this.
learn from
Oh
people
my
who have
god.
endured risk
So good though.
than those who have seemingly conquered it or avoided it. Because the
Addicted.
kind of skills that you need to endure risk are more likely repeatable and relevant to the future risks. I think if you can just avoid disaster and be patient, you don't need to make many smart decisions to do well over time for your optimism to actually pay off. If you can focus on using half of your capital and net worth to survive a continuous chain of surprises and setbacks, and then the other half to stick around and do well and have endurance in your finances, that is so powerful. Another way to think about this that is so critical in investing is that most investors want to answer the question, how can I earn higher returns? It seems like the obvious question that you should want to answer. But that's not actually the most important question that exists in investing. By far the most important question is, what are the best returns that I can earn for the longest period of time? What are the returns that I can earn for the next 10, 20, 30, 40 years? By and large, those are not the highest returns that you might be able to earn in any given year. But if you can stick around and endure the ups and downs and the nonsense that's going to take place between now and the long run, those are where the big returns occur over time. Number 9, nothing too good or too bad lasts indefinitely.
Ooh, that's a good one.
When you're in the middle of a powerful economic trend, it is difficult to imagine a force strong enough to turn things the other way. That's true when things are going very good, it's true when things are going very bad. What we tend to miss is that what turns trends around usually isn't some big outside force. It's when the subtle side effects of that trend itself erode what made it powerful to begin with. So let me give you an example. When there are no recessions, people get confident. When they get confident, they take risks. When they take risks, you get recessions. The same force that caused this thing to keep going is what eventually turns it in the other direction. Same in investing. If the stock market never crashed, stocks will go up. When stocks go up, valuations go up. Valuations go up, markets are prone to crash. It's the lack of crashes that plants the seed of the next crash. Whenever there are seeds of their turnaround through opportunity and panic-driven problem solving, we know that.
So what he's talking about, Tony Robbins talks about a lot, where he says good times create weak men, and weak men creates. So basically, he said there's a cycle where when things are good, think about it as like the four different seasons, right? Well, at least where I live, there's 4 different seasons. So in the winter, it's like super cold, no one's out, everyone kind of just stays at home. People sometimes get depressed because of seasonal depression, and then eventually, even though it seems like forever, there's spring, which like there's flowers blooming, so things are good. That you can reap. Things are starting to get really good, and then in the summer it's like hot, people are sweating, so you do have to work a little bit harder. And in the fall, that's when you reap all the fruits and vegetables and all the different plants and things like that. So he's just saying that there's never times where if it's bad right now, which a lot of people feel like it's bad right now, things will eventually pick back up. So that's pretty cool concept.
In hindsight, it's almost always true, almost everywhere. But we tend to only know it in hindsight because we are extrapolating machines. And drawing straight lines when forecasting is easier than imagining how people might be able to adapt and change their behavior as a trend goes on. Here's another example that I love from nature. When alcohol from fermentation grows, it reaches a certain point where it kills the yeast that made it in the first place. So like when alcohol gets so potent, it tends to like reverse and the whole process collapses. Most powerful economic trends, finance trends, end the exact same way. And that kind of force is not intuitive. But the thing that made it strong is what's going to actually kill it. It really requires you to consider not just how a trend impacts people, but how that impact will change people's behavior in a way that could end the trend altogether. Number 9, Having no FOMO might be the most important
FOMO.
financial skill. Being immune to the siren song of other people's success, especially when that success is sudden and extreme and caused by factors outside of their control, is so powerful. Else is going crazy. That's all you need to get ahead. FOMO is, this is why it's so dangerous. FOMO is recklessness masked as ambition. You see somebody else getting rich and you think, if they can do it, I can do it too. And that feels like a good emotion. It feels like you're learning through automation and you're following a data-driven path to success. But what's actually happened, quick windfall has probably left them in a fragile emotional state to be.
Interesting.
There's this great quote that I love from Charlie: "We'll always be getting richer than you," and that is not such a good, powerful quote that more of us should pay attention to, particularly in times like 2020 and 2021, when a lot of people around us were getting very rich very quickly. If you remove
Crypto,
FOMO from the equation,
blockchain.
think about what's left though. You only care about your own goals. You tend to avoid getting sucked into bubbles. You tend to think long term. And you don't really need much else than that to do well over time. Okay, number 10. If your expectations grow faster than your income, you will never be happy with your money.
Ooh,
no matter
that's a
how
good
much
one.
you accumulate. Wealth is a two-part equation. You need to grow your income, grow your net worth. Everyone knows that part. But then you need to keep your expectations in check relative to those numbers, or else you are never going to be satisfied with what you have. And it is so common in the financial services. Your attention, 100% of your attention on the growing your wealth and the effort goes into, which is great. That part makes sense. But I think there's almost a complete ignorance on the second half of the equation, which is keeping your expectations in check. And we all know, we all have seen someone who got very wealthy, did very well in their careers, did very well with their investments. But if their expectations rise by just as much, not only are they going to be unhappy with that success and unsatisfied with that success, but what really happens here is if you are never satisfied with the money that you have, people tend to take more risk, work longer hours, in this chase, in this pursuit for something that has no end. So they keep doing that, taking more risk, working more hours until it backfires on you. It's like if appetite for money is insatiable, it's eventually going to catch up with you. And there are criminal forms of this. Bernie Madoff is a great example of someone who was very successful in his career before the fraud, but took every risk that he could to earn more money. He started this fraud in a way that, of course, blew up on him, ruined his life, ruined his family's life. But the innocent version of this are the people who just have no appetite for more, so they keep taking more risk, working more hours until they end up regretting it. And it's a tragic thing to watch. And one thing that's important here is that having some idea of enough money does not mean that you have no aspirations for more. I want more money. I want a higher net worth and a higher income. Of course, everybody does. The concept of enough just means that you realize and you pay attention to the idea that if your expectations are growing just as much or faster than your income, you will never be satisfied with what you have. Number 11. There is rarely more or less economic uncertainty. Or just changes in how ignorant people are to potential risks. This is something, there is all these periods in the economy, when you go through periods where people say, there's so much uncertainty right now, heightened uncertainty, living in a time of uncertainty. And their idea, they're like, what is implicit in that? Is that the amount of uncertainty about the future can be higher at one point than another. But I think if you think this through, it's really not the case. There have been studies that try to track economic uncertainty, and they look about things like policy change and how much people are talking about uncertainty in the newspaper. And if you look at these studies, it tends to show that uncertainty bottomed, as in certainty over the future peaked in two periods. One is right before 9/11, the other is in 2007, right before the financial crisis, which makes no sense at all. Those were the periods when actually the future was as uncertain as it had ever been. We were staring down these enormous societal risks. We were just oblivious to it. And look, on September 10th, 2001, the risk of a terrorist attack was enormous. It was the highest it had ever been. We were all just oblivious to it. On September 11th, the risk of terrorist attacks did not increase. We just suddenly became aware of a risk that we were previously oblivious to. Asking what the biggest risk in the economy is like asking what you expect to be surprised about. Because if you knew what the biggest risk was, you would do something about it. And doing something about it makes it less risky.
All right, guys.
But
I'll
what your
see you
imagination
in like
cannot
half an hour.
fathom is